Hey, what's up, everybody? So, on this list of 10 things that you may not have thought of that you can get for free or at least very cheap to use in your garden, as I said, number one, window blinds. Everybody knows that window blinds do not last very long at all. They fall apart, they crack. And usually, what we do is we just fling them into the trash and forget about them and gripe a lot that they cost, a lot of money and they didn't last. So, what you can do with those instead, you can use the string that weaves up through them to tie something, for a plant or whatever. But the more obvious and easy thing you can use them for is just to cut them up with scissors and use them for plant tags to label your plants. They work great and obviously a lot cheaper than going out and spending, say, $10 or something like that on a pack of plant labels. So that's the first thing. And a great thing about these is they're already white, so you can write on them with a Sharpie, and they're already basically the right width and all that, and they're sturdy. Just the perfect thing to snip up with scissors and label and put them on your plants. So that's something I will be doing, I know, very soon because ours are falling apart, and I'll be using them on the plants instead of buying them at the local store. Number two on this list is a clear plastic tote. Now, if you were like me and a lot of other people, you started out gardening small, you don't have a whole lot of space, you don't necessarily have the money or space or anything else to build like a huge greenhouse, for example. So people are always looking, just like me, for ways to do this for cheaper or on a smaller scale. So one thing I had an issue with is everybody kept talking about winter sowing and doing this in milk jugs. And there's nothing wrong with that. That can work great too. But if you just need a little makeshift, quick, simple greenhouse setup, just for starting some plants, for example, you can get clear plastic totes at the Goodwill for like $2, sometimes $1, way cheaper than you can get them at, say, the local store, where they're $5, $10, $15, $20, and a lot more than that sometimes. But if for just a couple dollars you go to the Goodwill or to some local thrift shop or whatever, and you get for just a couple dollars this clear plastic tote, all you have to do is drill some holes in the top and bottom for water and air to get through. Don't make the holes very big. You want them to be small because you don't want too much water and air getting through. It is unbelievable how well they work. I started all kinds of different plants last winter in that, and none of them had any frost damage. And then you don't have to worry about having a light and moving them in and out and all this, big pain in the butt stuff. You just throw your plants in there, water them, check on them from time to time, and then you get that cheap, quick, effective, easy little way to just, set up something on a table on your back porch or whatever, and boom, you've got your safe, secure plants that, by the way, don't get too much rain getting on them because most of it is deflected. The birds can't get to them. It's just a great setup to be able to start plants out there like that instead of doing all the, off and on timers and fans and lights and all that inside when you're starting plants. And there's nothing wrong with that either. I do that too sometimes. It depends on the situation and it depends on the plants. But I have found very few things that are this simple, cheap, effective. I mean, I have nothing but good to say about it. And it works so well that, why would you not want to do it? And you could probably fit I don't even know, in a typical 15 or 20 gallon tote, you might be able to fit, 10, 20, 30 plants in there, small little plants, and have plenty of room to start them and not worry about anything happening to them. And plus, when you have that many in there and they're all watered, that's pretty heavy. So you don't have to worry so much about a little gust of wind blowing it down or whatever. So I suggest that people give this a try because it works fantastically well for starting your plants outside in the winter or for just, a certain time of the year where you think it's going to be inclement weather of some other kind. It's just a great little cheap do-it-yourself greenhouse setup. Number three on this list is here is a cheap, very cheap, easy way to heat your greenhouse when you don't want to go the route of an actual heater and all that expensive stuff. Let's say you have a modest greenhouse. I don't know how well this would work for a gigantic one, but most people are going to have a moderate or small one as far as size. And you want a way to heat it just enough to where it can survive those really cold nights. Your plants can survive that. And you're trying to figure out, how can I do this? How can I make this work? Well, one of the most easy, cheap, fantastic ways, get a 55-gallon drum paint it black, or preferably get one that's black already. That way it absorbs all the heat from the sun. And, a metal one, a plastic one, a wooden barrel, any of that would work. I would think probably a wooden would be best if it's watertight, just because it insulates better. It holds heat longer than like thin, flimsy plastic or metal. Wood is more insulative. But as long as it's, and I say 55-gallon drum, but whatever size fits reasonably in your greenhouse. You don't want to take up all your space in the greenhouse, of course, but whatever you have the size for. And just have a container in there that's black with a black lid, of course, as well, and fill it with water. Now, some people say it works better when there's no lid. You can try both ways. But black container, fill it with water, and as that absorbs all the heat and light and everything of the sun all day long, it takes a long time for that heat to dissipate. So that will heat your greenhouse at night and keep your plants safe. Now, will it take a 10-degree night and turn it to a balmy 90 degrees in there? No, but it will make it plenty warm in there to where, if you're doing it right, of course, you have to experiment with it. If you're doing it right, it will make it plenty warm in there through the night to where it can survive, your plants can survive the night on really cold nights. Now, this may not apply to places that are just absolutely outrageously cold, or like I say, if it's a huge greenhouse and how many of those barrels can you put in there. But for the average backyard gardener who just has a modest greenhouse and they want to just keep it warm enough to where everything will be safe through cold nights here and there. In other words, use your best judgment. And a lot of people say, well, it's a common sense thing, but this is a great way to basically for free, because as we all know, you can find things like this for cheap or nothing a lot of times. I've seen things like this on Marketplace on Facebook. So there you go. There's a way that you can, just with a barrel and some water, heat your greenhouse through the cold nights. Number 4 on this list is bamboo food skewers, or meat skewers, vegetable skewers. I am so glad I found out. I'm so glad I found this out. I just kind of stumbled upon it. So in the Dollar Tree, for example, that we're near where I am, I'm sure you can find stuff like this in a lot of different stores. $1.25 for 12 of these bamboo food skewers. And they're long. They're like 2.5 feet long. So imagine how many you can make out of that, because you don't need the full length ones for everything. Now, are they going to be good for little tiny seedlings? Probably not, unless you cut them down very small. Are they going to be big or good for tomatoes or something like that? No, but there are a lot of sort of small to medium, I guess you'd say, plants that work perfectly with these. And if you need them to be a little more sturdy, you can just tie a few of them together, but they're pretty sturdy as they are. So it's one of those things, like as soon as you see it and you see the price, it just, a light kind of goes off in your head and you're thinking, why did I never think of that before? $1.25? And you could even cut them in half to be like, I don't know, a foot and a half long each, whatever. And then you have 24 of them for $1.25. And I've used them extensively. They are fantastic. I have no complaints about them, other than the fact that, they are fairly small. They're not going to be good for something really big, but I've used them to start like even sunflowers and stuff like that. And even sunflowers that get very big before you transplant them, because they grow so vigorously. They're fantastic. I mean, you just cannot go wrong with those. Go into your local Dollar Tree or Dollar General, Goodwill, whatever, and, get these little skewers, and they're perfect for steaks. I'm sure they could be used for a lot of other things in the garden, but just for staking plants is the most obvious and quick thing that comes to mind. So give it a try. You will not be unhappy that you did. Number 5 is a little less common. I don't think I've heard anybody else mention this online. Now, if you want to start something that people typically say you can't start that because it's got a long taproot that can't be disturbed, like, for example, a sunflower, there is a way to do that. Get you the right size. You'll have to do that research on your own to figure out what's the right size. PVC pipe, and cut it lengthways with a Dremel tool or whatever you want, all the way down in half. And then just loosely tape that up. Fill it with dirt, and then you can grow a sunflower or whatever you want to that's got a long taproot, and it'll just feed straight down as it grows. Make sure it's wide enough to where it doesn't constrict the root growth, side to side. Then the taproot can just go straight down into that PVC pipe, and you can prop it up on something and put a light over it. There's a million ways to make it work. But once it's ready to transplant out, then you just use an auger bit or a shovel or whatever you want, make your hole out there in the garden, and then feed that straight down into that hole. Make sure you've got somebody to help you. You probably need somebody to help you. Untape it and very gently move those sides of that pipe outward and pull them straight up. And then you've got your transplant of whatever it is that has the long taproot, undisturbed, straight out into the ground out there. And then you can fill it in, backfill it with potting soil or whatever you're using. Water it in really good. Use a stake. I would say still use a stake until it's established and it's got its root system really sturdy and worked up in there and developed. But then, boom, you've proven the naysayers wrong. You've started something that has a long taproot. And that's a way to, is it a little bit fiddly and kind of funky to try to make that work? Yes. But if your heart is set on, starting something that has a long taproot that you don't want to disturb, you don't want to stunt the growth, you don't want to take the chance of breaking that taproot or whatever, you want to do it that way instead of direct sowing it out there, well, then there's a way to make it happen. As they say, where there's a will, there's a way. And I know if you're anything like me, you like the challenge of being able to say, you know what, I figured out a way to make this work. Yes, it was a little bit harder, but again, you like the challenge. And then in the end, you can say, you know what, look at that. I made it work. I did something that everybody said couldn't be done. And I found a way to be able to say, no, I'm going to do this. I want to do this. And you're not going to tell me I'm not going to do it. So again, that's a way that you can just sort of, trick the plant into thinking that it's undisturbed. Number 6. Now, if you're anything like me, you've gone to the stores and you've seen these planters and plant pots. The prices are laugh out loud ridiculous. I mean, you just see them and you just burst into laughter. I mean, the prices are absolutely ludicrous. Now, I'm not trying to be a cheapskate, but if you go down to Walmart and pay $4 measly, you can get a white, food-safe, 5-gallon bucket. Food safe is great for if you want to grow tomatoes or whatever you want to grow in them. It's great that it's white because it reflects all that light and you don't have to worry about your root zone cooking in a hot summer. It's just perfect. I mean, it's the perfect size for a lot of things, the perfect color, the perfect price. Everything about them is great. I've used them for indeterminate tomatoes. They were single leader, so that was part of the reason I was able to do that. Just had one vine growing out. Might not work so well if you have 2 or 3 or 4 vines growing out of there, but for just one, it was great. And a lot of people think it's very important to have food safe containers. Obviously you don't need that if you're just growing like a flower or something that you're not going to be eating, but 5-gallon is a great size for a lot of different things. As I said, food safe and white because the color, reflecting all the sun, and the price being $4. It's one of those things you cannot go wrong. So go down there and pick you up some of those, and then you won't have to sit there and crack up and laugh at these $3 million pots that they try to sell. And plus, they're sturdy. You tip them over, they're not going to break. I've got ones that have lasted years. So that's another thing that I say, I wish I had been doing this whole time. And they're just great. It's just a great thing to be able to go down there and say, hey, you know what? I can spend, $12 and get 3 of these and be able to plant stuff and not have to, break the bank. Number 7. Now, this is another thing that I just ran into by pure chance. It wasn't that I was looking for this stuff, but I always noticed that it seemed like little seedling starter pots and stuff like that were either very small or way too big. And I always thought, why is it so hard to just find something that's a little bigger for a plant that grows really fast, or maybe you've started it a little too early or whatever, and you don't want to constantly up pot and upsize the stuff that you're planting it in. But you don't want these itty bitty little 2-inch tall by 1-inch wide cells to plant something in, but you also don't want to put it in a 5-gallon bucket. Well, I found at Walmart, again, for $4, an 8-pack of 2-quart, that's half-gallon, seedling pots, black plastic pots, and they're the perfect size. And since you get $8 of them for $4, that's 50 cents a piece. you could kind of stock up on them if you wanted. And they're just that perfect in between size. It's like one of those nursery pots that you go and buy something in and you think, man, this is perfect. I need to save this. Well, there you go. You can go and get 8 of them for $4. And, they're sturdy. They're a good shape and size and height and everything. They might be a little bit top heavy if you live in a very windy area or something like that. So, keep an eye on that. But as far as having a cheap option to have an in between sort of medium size pot to have seedlings in, or heck, even to just put plants in while you're transplanting them to some other person's house or whatever you want to use them for. And I'm looking at the site right now, and they're 5 inches across on the top. They're 3.5 inches across on the bottom, and they're 6.5 inches tall. So the perfect size to have a generous but not oversized, ridiculous pot that will buy you a lot of time. You can keep that seedling or that plant in there for a long time until you got to transplant it out or whatever. That way you don't have like, hey, I'm just stuck between, I have two options, tiny, itty bitty, or gigantic. These are just that perfect size that for some reason I never seem to see anywhere else, but I've seen them at Walmart. So run down there and pick you some up, and you'll be glad you did because they are perfect for that in-between size. Now, are they good to start little tiny seedlings in? Maybe not, because a lot of people argue that, I've seen a lot of people say from the school of thought basically that you want to stay with a small thing at first, but at some point you will want to transplant them up. And when you want to transplant them up, you don't necessarily want to do that a bunch of times. So let's say you have a seedling that's, got several sets of true leaves and it's, several inches tall, but it's something that's going to grow fast and get very big, and it's not going to be transplanted out, overnight, but it's going to be a little while. So this is that perfect thing to put it in and like buy yourself some time. It will not be perfect for all types of plants. It will not be perfect for all situations. But if you're into gardening a lot and you do it a lot, you will run into situations where this is perfect for you. So I just wanted to give that as a tip, and let's get on to the next one. On to number 8. Now, number 8 is probably going to be one of those things where people are like, what is he talking about? This seems ridiculous. Now, it's just a fan, right? It's a fan used outside. And people are going to be like, why would you have a fan outside? And that's kind of the way I thought as well. The person that actually gave me this idea was my dad. And if he was having a barbecue or something like that, and he didn't want the mosquitoes and flies and everything just, crowding around and bees trying to sting us and everything, he'd have these big metal fans outside on the back porch, and it would just keep them all away. It was amazing how well it worked. And at first, I just thought it was so stupid because I thought he had them out there to create some sort of breeze. And I'm like, Dad, it's already, breezy out here. We're outside. But once he explained it to me, I was like, that's really kind of genius because it works so well. Now, it probably wouldn't work with a little tiny puny fan. You're going to have a pretty good size sort of industrial type fan. I don't mean one of those ones that are 10 feet tall. I'm just saying, the ones that are probably metal and put out a good airflow. But it got me to thinking, it's not good just for that. Let's say you're out in the garden, you're trying to work on something, you're being constantly harassed by wasps, bees, bitten up by mosquitoes, or let's just say it's very hot and you're sweating and there's no wind. Put a fan out there on you, pointed towards you. It doesn't have to be something that creates a 40-mile-per-hour breeze, 100 feet away. Just something to kind of deter those pests and, give you some airflow and make you more comfortable out there. And it's also good for just, you're out there enjoying your garden, sitting around, drinking a cup of tea or whatever, and you don't want to get eaten up by mosquitoes. It is great. It's amazing how well it works. Not only to deter pests, but I'm sure you guys will think of other things that I'm not listing here. But another thing, there are certain times where, like, let's say a backyard gardener, like I've been a lot of times, you have plants out there on your back porch, right? And it's insanely hot and you don't have shade cloth and there's no breeze. Well, put a fan out there. It will make a big difference for your plants to keep them from cooking. And people, of course, will say, oh, but I don't want to blow away the pollinators. That's true. But what's more important, pollination or your plants just cooking and being useless and you got to throw them away? So in certain instances for, like I said, deterring pests, cooling yourself down when you're out there gardening, having them out there, your fan out there, so it can cool down your plants. These are such, I guess you'd say, unusual or unorthodox ideas that you never really think of. I never thought for, I don't know how many years went by, I never would have thought have a fan outside, fans for inside where there's no breeze. And it does serve that purpose. But certain things when you're gardening, growing plants, doing whatever you're doing, you want to try to, you want to try to keep cool. You want to try to keep your plants cool. Don't want the pests bothering you. There's a lot of different. Now, do you want to have it out there all the time plugged in? Of course not. What if it rains? You don't want to, make your electricity bill huge or whatever. But there are instances where it is a great idea and it works very well. I've even seen people go so far as to hook like a big net or something onto the front of the fan, and the fan will actually blow mosquitoes and pests and stuff like that into that net. And then you can just dispose of them as you see fit for somebody who's like overrun by mosquitoes and doesn't want to use chemicals or whatever. So again, there's always ways that you can think up to make something like this simple little thing that you'd have laying around your house work for you in ways that you didn't think it could. Number 9, I cannot believe I didn't think of this. Again, it's one of those things where you're like, why didn't I ever think of this? $1.25 at the Dollar Tree, a spray bottle. Have a spray bottle handy to put on, like a peroxide solution to treat something like a tomato virus, which will typically only slow it down. It won't really get rid of it, depending on the virus, depending on the disease that it's got. Or just to moisten plants that like high humidity. Like I said, spraying any sort of treatment, whether it be against pests or against disease. So many uses for it. What I like it for the most is when you're dealing with seed starting trays. It doesn't matter if you've got the cocoa pellets or the peat pellets or just the little empty trays cells that you're filling with loose potting soil or whatever seed starting mix. It can be such a mess trying to moisten those and not disturb the seeds or not send that stuff over the side as you're putting too much water in there at once. Now, it is good to bottom water, but there are certain times where you have to do it that way. Or let's say you filled them in and you realize you don't have a watertight tray. There's always situations where it comes up. So, what I use it for the most is not only for when you initially get them started and moistening them and getting the seeds in there and all that, but where it comes in the most handy for me when dealing with those seed starting trays is when they start to dry out. So I just put that little spray nozzle right next to the top of the plant, not spraying the plant itself, of course, but just moisten the top of that peat or cocoa pellet. It's perfect. It's night and day difference between trying to water them in the typical way. Now, if you have a watertight tray and you just want to add some water to the bottom and let it come up from the bottom, that works too. It wicks up with that capillary action or whatever they call it. I've heard that called a lot of different things, which is why I say whatever they call it. But just having a spray bottle on hand for those little oddball things that come up that you never would have thought of is fantastic. Number 10, everybody, and this is something that comes in very handy, especially with how, again, insanely expensive lumber has been in recent years. It's enough to just make you want to never build anything again. But one of the things that I noticed when I went into, I don't know if it was Home Depot or Lowe's or one of those places, was the furring strips. They're just 1 by 2 by 8 foot pine untreated furring strips, just little boards. But they're pretty sturdy. They're not something you would want to build a deck out of course, but they're only like $1 or $2. So you can make trellises out of them. Use them just for stakes by cutting the one end of them off at kind of an angle to make like a point. Perfect for stakes, very sturdy, perfect for trellises, and super cheap. And no, they won't last forever because they're not treated, but I've already have ones that I've had for years and they're still in great shape. And I use them for tomato stakes. I use them for making trellises out of all kinds of stuff. You can build little things out of it. You could build a little, if you had enough of them, I built a little decorative bench to hold pots that I painted and made it look really cool. So there's a lot of things you could use them for. The most obvious, of course, would probably be trellises and stakes. But as cheap as they are, you could go down and say, you can also ask the people there, do you have any ones that are slightly messed up that you've put off to the side that are like reduced in price? A lot of times they will have those. Not that they're not already super cheap. I think I went down there and I got like 5 or 10 of them. And again, they're 1 inch by 2 inch by 8 feet. So a good sized board that's not exactly sturdy and huge, but for what you're using it for is perfect. And 5 or 10 of them at $1 or $2 a piece is very affordable. I mean, you'll pay $5, $6, $7, $8 for just one little stake that's not even near that big. Or you'll go and say pay $15 to $30 for a little small trellis when you can make one yourself out of, furring strips. And it's just one of the best things that I've discovered in recent years for handy, cheap things to have around that can be used for so many different things. I always keep some around. They're very cheap, like I said, and you really can't go wrong with them, honestly. Number 11. I've thrown a little bonus one on there at the end, just for the heck of it, for you people that have stayed around to the end of the video. And this is, again, admittedly, just something that I happened upon by pure chance. So, again, Dollar Tree, $1.25. They have pretty big sections for the price of fishnet. And I think it's just decorative. I think it's for like sea or ocean related decor. I don't know what you use that for, how it would be used, but it's that type of decor. But it's just fishnet, and it's pretty small. I'm what to say. It's just like 1 inch or 2 in between the squares of the little network that it makes. So perfect size and the perfect thing to make a trellis out of. And a lot of people, of course, is not going to be your thing, or you're growing something that's very heavy. It wouldn't work for that. But if you're just growing, like, say, a climbing flower up a trellis, what I did to make a really cheap, and this is all stuff from this list, I had a 5-gallon bucket that I bought for $4, and I got 2 of the furring strips that I screwed into either side of the bucket to make like a framework on either side, 8 feet tall on the top of the bucket. And then I just used this fishnet that I'm talking about. That was $1.25. So I probably spent let's say rounding up, like $4 on the bucket, $4 for the 2 furring strips. That's $8 plus the $1.25 for the fishnet. So under $10 or whatever, not counting the dirt. I already had the dirt. And what I was growing was the Thunbergia, I guess is how you pronounce it. It was the Black-Eyed Susan vine. I think it was the African sunset variety, but I knew it was not a big, heavy flower or heavy vine, but it needed something to crawl up. So I just got this fishnet, and I think the fishnet was like 5 feet by 8 feet or something like that, plenty big. And I just mounted it to the, I think stapled it or something like that, or maybe I used zip ties or something. I don't remember. Is it the most beautiful thing in the world? No, but we're going for cheap, simple, affordable things here. So I just affixed it to the either side of the furring strips on either side of the bucket, and it provided a perfect and very cheap thing for this Black-Eyed Susan African sunset flower to grow up, and it was beautiful. It worked perfectly well. The flowers are beautiful, not very big flowers, but still really neat. So it's just an example of, again, a super cheap thing that you can pick up very easily at your local store to make something like a trellis that a lot of people need, a lot of people use, a lot of people want, but they don't want to pay this huge amount of money for a trellis. So that's just one thing you could use it for. In the interest of keeping this video under 12 hours long, I won't go into every little thing that these can be used for, but the most obvious thing, of course, is the trellis. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video, and I hope that you got something out of it. And this plant-related stuff, garden-related stuff, this is new for me on this channel. So obviously, I will always be looking for ways to improve it. So I'm not thin-skinned. If you want to give me tips and pointers, like this is how you can improve it, or this is something you'd like to see, or whatever, I'm not going to whine and cry if you critique my videos. It's fine. I want to improve it. I want to make it better and better. So I hope these 10, well, actually 11, ideas for you. Will give you something to start in your garden. If you're most likely, if you're a veteran gardener, you've already thought of a lot of this stuff. But if you're a fairly new or novice gardener, this list might have some things you can really put to use, and it might even spark your little ideas of your own. Like, hey, that makes me think that this would work too. In which case, I'd love to hear about those things too. If you have your own little ideas you want to throw in the comment section. But again, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. And please leave me ideas on how to improve or things you want to see on this channel. And I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.